masonry repointing. And hopefully for some of you, introduce you to some ancient techniques that are much cleverer than we all imagine. Mine being particularly an interest of mine, probably the first nanotechnology, although perhaps the Romans, they looked at understood what we're talking about. Scott and I worked in SGH for a good many years together, and he's now in Spectracom, and the Spectra staff are going to be in the audience and helping with the demos. Subsequently, Scott's got a preservation degree from UPenn, where I'm on the adjunct faculty, and he's a civil engineer for his sins. I'm a British trained architect, and I guess in this audience we've got a kind of mixed clientele here. How many contractors in the audience? Not at least 3, 4 engineers, 2, 3, and conservators. Not one coming. Architects. Yeah, good. Okay. How many of you can remember your high school chemistry? Not so many. Okay. Well, that's going to be a challenge for me to lead you through this, but I'm sure we'll cope. We're going to kind of develop a didactic in terms of the constituent parts of materials in mortars, what their properties and characteristics are, how they combine together in mixes, how we then use those in various ways, and I hope you'll see by the end of the afternoon after the demos that the performance of a mortar in masonry is as much to do with the way it's prepared and installed and then cared for immediately after installation as it is to do with the recipe of the mix. And the analogy is with baking a cake. You can have all the right ingredients in the recipe, but if you don't follow the procedures, it ain't going to turn out very well.
For mortar removal, since we have a mortar joint, it's a bad mortar joint. We want to take that out, but we don't want to damage the masonry unit. So what we do is we go ahead and we score either side of the joint. And we try not to make our pressure go down against the brick or the masonry unit, whatever it is. We don't want to go to the center of the joint and hit it from the center until we've scored the side. And then we go to the other side of the brick and we score that. And then the depth we're looking for, a lot of times I'll go down and I'll follow the deterioration down. I don't want to leave any deteriorated mortar in there. And I use that as more of a guide than you know, 2 times the width of the joint. Because sometimes you might need to go down further. It's kind of interesting here. You can see how this mortar, it's a soft mortar, and hitting it, it's coming out. Over on this one, we have a cement-based mortar. So this is a completely different thing. To try to get this out, you know, it's a lot harder of a process. And this is something where if it wasn't causing damage, I'd probably leave it in, because I'd maybe be doing more damage to the brick trying to get it out than the good of the replacement of it. But with the cement-based mortars, a lot of times, because this is such a hard surface, it's not porous, and the buildings really need to breathe. And so as the water goes into the building, it needs to come out somewhere. When it comes out, a lot of times it's coming out with salts and mineral deposits, efflorescence. And so we want that to come out through this grout line. And if for instance, we have a grout line that's non-porous or less porous than our masonry unit, then all that moisture is going to come out through our masonry unit. And as we talked about, especially with bricks, where you have that surface layer that's a harder surface than the interior portion because it was fired on the exterior of the brick where it got hotter, that'll tend to pop off a lot of times as that moisture comes out. So, and you always, when you're using a chisel, you want to use a chisel that's basically about the size of your grout line or a little smaller. So once I get that scored, then I can go in the center of the grout line with my smaller chisel and start taking it out.
Any kind of a guideline on how much you take out over time?
Again, like here, I'm going down till I find the stable substrate, or I'm, you know, I'd like to get 2 inches the width of that line.
I mean, area of the wall.
Oh, area of the walls.
Dig the whole wall first and come back, or how do you?
You know, if the mortar is still doing its job, I usually leave it in. Even if there's maybe a hairline crack on the mortar, sometimes that's not really bad. Sometimes, you know, that's you know, almost like a weep hole, you know, to let the water up, you know, depending on how hard the mortar is. But that's a good point, you know, how much do you replace? I always, you know, work on replacing as minimal amount as possible because, you know, that is historic fabric essentially, and if it's still working, if it's still doing its job, we want to leave that in place. So right now we're at an area where, you know, I want to get these wet, these joints ready for adhesion. And a lot of times, you know, if this was on a wall or I was on a job, I'd use a spray gun. Now you can see how fast the water actually absorbs into here. And the porosity of the brick, sometimes that's a good way to gauge, you know, how strong you want your mortar to be.
Use a latex coating to improve the bond?
You never want to use a latex coating because that essentially is, it becomes a surface layer that's going to trap moisture in there and not allow it to breathe. And so that there are sealers that are formulated to use, but what you want to use is a penetrating sealer instead of like an acrylic or a latex sealer. And so the penetrating sealer actually goes into the substrate, and it absorbs into the bricks and repels water from the inside instead of being a surface layer.
Siloxane sealer?
Yeah, siloxane sealer, yeah.
But do any of those cause any discoloration when they break it or when they permeate in?
No, not really. You know, depending on how much you apply, sometimes, I mean, the minor miscoloration that you might get, you know, it's doing more good than bad.
Now, lime putty is a marvelous material because once you've made it, once it's in this condition, it will store forever. You know, if you go buy a bag of Portland cement from Home Depot, leave it outdoors, it's dead in a couple of weeks, right? This stuff, as long as you keep the air off it, it will last in perpetuity. I've walked into the Roman Forum in Rome and cleared back some sods of earth off some old lime pits, and in front of me was 3,000-year-old lime putty, still okay, still ready to use. In the Czech Republic, they dig out fields with, they look like grave pits. Pour in the lime putty, put the sods of earth back over the top, and they'll come back and use those in 100 years' time. You can do another thing, you can mix the sand with the lime and protect that from the air, and it will last as a ready-made mortar in perpetuity. It will not go off. That's called coarse stuff. Now, we've got no proportioning implements like gauge boxes or anything else. So Scott and I have just been messing around, adding more and more sand to the mix. You see how it's getting stiffer. That's pretty stiff. You can't do that with most bedding mortars. Okay? What's happening is the dry board is taking moisture out of this, and you end up with a material you can place very precisely. So I would, just as a gut feel, I think this is about 1 to 2.5, 1 to 3, maybe we could, is that stiffer? A little bit. Yeah, this isn't bad enough. So we've probably got a 1 to 2.5 mix here, so it's quite lime rich. You could add more sand to this, you could make it a lot stiffer, get rid of some of the water by adding more dry sand, not ever adding more water. And you should be able to place that in a joint without any staining or mess, provided you've got the right width and pointing key to do it.
So now we got the mix, you know, and this is a little on the soft side, you know, it could use a little sand, a little more working, but it's good. You can see I got a big lift here. And so I can take that and power that and compress that into the joint. Then I want to go ahead and recompress and recompress. And with these masonry units, I'm not as concerned about getting residue mortar onto
Pretty dry, yeah, it's going to come off real quick.
Yeah, it's going to come off real quick. Also, they're not too porous. You know, depending on the masonry unit, you can go to some extents as taping down the masonry. You know, if you have a real absorbent stone and you're really concerned about the mortar bleeding into it. A lot of times what I'll do is when I clean up, I won't even sponge it. I'll just take a dry rag when it's like an unglazed unit or a porous masonry, and I'll towel it off